Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, August 21st, 2019 edition of our little weather get-together. And tonight is show number 289. So we welcome you to the program. Tonight's guest is Jordan Gerth. He works up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he works a lot with satellites. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the satellites and maybe how 5G, as you've heard in the news over the past couple of months, 5G is starting to come out. We're going to talk about how 5G may affect some of those weather models and weather forecasts and weather satellites that we use. And so we're going to get to the bottom of that and just see what the problem could be as we begin to advance into the 5G world. So a pretty interesting show tonight. I'm sure you'll be hearing about this throughout the next couple of months as we really start to see this process go down. So we're happy to have Jordan on with us tonight. And we'd love for you to interact with us tonight. As we are a live broadcast, we'd love for you to interact via social media on our Facebook Live, Periscope, our YouTube page, and our Twitch page. All you got to do is ask those questions or submit comments to our guest or even to our panelists, and we'll watch those and monitor them throughout the show. And if we see any questions that we need to answer, we'll definitely do that as well. And if you're listening on the podcast version, we'll let Jordan give out some information towards the end of the show, how you can find more information about tonight's topic. We do want to mention that there are some strong thunderstorms moving through central North Carolina, moving into the Wadesboro up to Raleigh-Durham area. So you're looking at the radar here as some storms move into Raleigh, and there you can actually see some video. This is from NC State, so those storms really moving into the Raleigh area. Thankfully, it's after the rush hour, so we won't see any major traffic concerns. But again, another day of thunderstorms, not only in Raleigh, but throughout the Carolinas. We're going to talk more about that at the end of the show towards the 9 o'clock hour. We've had several days of severe weather, and we'll report about that towards the end of the show. So let's get to our guest tonight. Let's bring in Jordan Gerth. Jordan, welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. We're happy to have you this evening.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And so, Jordan, first-time question that we give our first-time guests. How did you get caught into this crazy weather world that we all work in? Kind of tell us the background of you and your weather history and how you got caught the weather bug, per se.
Well, I think I caught the weather bug pretty early on. I have weather records dating back to when I was in kindergarten, actually, and always was fascinated by changes in the weather and trying to predict it, and actually using the newspaper to verify my predictions to see if they were right. And, even in kindergarten, the climatology sometimes works out okay for making those temperature predictions. I just stuck with it through my high school years, and actually volunteered at the National Weather Service, and then found a home at the University of Wisconsin, the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies, where I did not only my undergraduate work, but my graduate work and my postdoc, my first job, all there in Madison, and really started learning about weather satellites and how we use weather satellites to predict the weather, and how weather satellites can even be used for other applications.
Well, you're speaking of satellites. We want to go to a quick video. A lot of you folks may have heard the term satellite, but maybe you're not quite sure what they do. So let's get to this video right quick, show you what it's all about, and then we'll come back and talk about satellites and how the 5G network could be interfering with our weather forecast.
NOAA's environmental satellites provide data from space to monitor the Earth, to analyze coastal waters, relay life-saving emergency beacons, and predict and track tropical storms and hurricanes. NOAA operates 3 types of satellite systems for the United States: polar orbiting satellites, geostationary satellites, and our deep space satellite. Polar orbiting satellites circle the Earth and provide global information from 540 miles above the surface. Geostationary satellites constantly monitor the Western Hemisphere from 22,240 miles above the Earth. And our deep space satellite orbits 1 million miles from Earth, providing space weather alerts and forecasts, while also monitoring the amounts of solar energy absorbed by Earth every day. Satellites enable us to provide consistent long-term observations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By remotely sensing from their orbits high above the Earth, they provide us much more information than would be possible to obtain solely from the surface. Over 90% of the data that goes into our weather models is from satellites. They track fast-breaking storms across Tornado Alley, as well as tropical storms in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Using satellites, NOAA researchers can also more closely study the ocean. Information gathered by these satellites can tell us about ocean bathymetry, sea surface temperature, coral reefs, and sea and lake ice. Satellites provide other services beyond just imaging the Earth. Monitoring conditions in space and solar flares from the sun help us understand how conditions in space affect the Earth. Satellites also relay position information from emergency beacons to help save lives when people are in distress on boats, airplanes, or in remote areas. Each year, thousands of people are rescued through SARSAT, Search and Rescue Satellite-Aided Tracking. Scientists also use a data collection system on the satellites to relay data from transmitters on the ground to researchers in the field, such as measuring tidal heights or the migration of whales. Monitoring the Earth from space helps us understand how the Earth works and affects much of our daily lives.
All right. So let's start real basic about weather satellites. Why are weather satellites important, and what are the different kinds of weather satellites?
So there's really two primary weather satellites that are out there. Those are what we call the geostationary. Those orbit with the Earth. So they're always looking at the same point on the Earth. And that's what we have the GOES Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite series that look at the United States. GOES 16 and 17 you might be familiar with. There's also the polar orbiters, those that go from pole to pole, and they actually do so very, very quickly, about every 100 minutes, and the Earth rotates underneath it. So those satellites see the whole Earth at least twice per day, which is pretty incredible. And we need both sets of those satellites to really get a comprehensive picture of what the atmosphere, the current state of the atmosphere is, and then using those observations and numerical models, these kind of complex mathematical algorithms to see, what the forecast is going to be, what that storm is going to do. And so it's not only U.S. satellites that contribute that, but there's European satellites, Japanese satellites, Chinese satellites, a vast range of satellites around the world sense the weather, and those weather satellite observations really help on the prediction aspect of things.
Jordan, this kind of off topic, well, not off topic, but kind of off of what we're going to talk about. Any idea of how many satellites there are, weather satellites up there orbiting around?
Oh, man, I don't know. There's quite a few I'd have to count, or certainly in the dozens if you look, include all the international satellites. I think the U.S. right now in the geostationary orbit, we have about 4 of them that are functional, and those 2 of them are active. GOES 16, 17, and GOES 15 is actually helping out GOES 17 during these thermal anomalies that's happening, and then we have 1 spare. And then in the polar orbit, there's a whole host of them. The most recent is NOAA 20, and these satellites have lifespans of approximately 5 to 10 years apiece, and a lot of them exceed their life expectancy. There's a satellite that I don't know when NOAA 15 is launched. We'd have to look it up, but it's been up there for quite a while, and it's only starting now to kind of fail as the parts wear out. But these satellites do last a while, and they're able to contribute a lot of observations.
So tonight we're talking about 5G and how it may interfere with weather forecasting. So first of all, maybe for those who may not know what 5G is, could you kind of give us a brief explanation of that and just kind of talk about this topic that's come up, and just kind of give us a background of what it's all about.
So it all comes down to radio frequencies, and everybody that has a phone probably looks at it. If you're in a rural area, you might see 3G. Most people in cities are now seeing 4G or LTE service. These are the kind of enhanced speed cellular services that are out there, and those actually use radio frequencies to get data from the cell towers that you see to your phone. Now, 5G is essentially the next generation. It's actually not very specifically defined in terms of what the speeds are going to be from 5G, but it's going to be faster. And so when you're buying new phones, you're probably very soon going to be buying phones that are equipped to handle those 5G signals, as we're just starting to see 5G roll out in the United States. Now, those radio frequencies are used by satellites as well. And because radio frequencies are kind of a finite resource and the government has to kind of parcel them out, we're getting a little bit close to where the weather satellites are operating and the cell phones. And that's kind of the issue with 5G coming online and still trying to obtain quality observations from our weather satellites.
And so, Jordan, I was reading some articles, and one of those articles quoted you saying that this is a global concern.
It is.
As this starts to unroll. So kind of talk to us about that, why this is a global concern, and what it may mean for the weather satellites that you spoke of earlier that are already in orbit.
So there's a lot of satellites already in orbit, and those satellites, long-standing tradition of using a frequency called 24 gigahertz. And 24 gigahertz is sensitive to land surfaces, and it's sensitive to water vapor. And what we use that for is the numerical weather models and the prediction. So what's happening is, if 5G rolls out globally and there's all of these signals that are coming online very close to where we're trying to sense the atmosphere, what the weather satellites that have been up there and we continue to use will see is actually the 5G signal. And that 5G signal will therefore could confuse the weather models, and the forecast skill could decrease. And that's really the big concern here, is not really knowing what's going on in the atmosphere because it's being masked by new 5G networks that are getting rolled out.
So, Jordan, can you talk about how the weather enterprise has to share space with the communication spectrum?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. So here in the United States, and every country kind of has its own regulatory body in this regard, but think of it as a neighborhood or an apartment building. You've got a lot of people that have to live together, and because of the demand for technology now, there's even more people trying to fit in. And so what the FCC is essentially doing is looking for more space to try to cram people in. But, again, the neighborhoods, apartment buildings are fixed sizes. And so you can only cram so many people into bedrooms or whatever, closets, to make room for them. And so what we have here is new 5G, which a lot of people want. It's going to be a great thing, advance American innovation. But they're trying to fit it in very, very close to where we're already trying to sense the weather. And at some point, we all need a little elbow room. It's like flying economy on an airplane.
So, the water vapor, Jordan, you're talking about, is that the main concern that we're facing? And we see water vapor. We use it a lot for tropics, and just seeing the way that the storm systems move and the moisture that's available. Is that the main concern, or what are some other concerns that we find from this?
I mean, the big concern here is certainly related to water vapor, although as the FCC continues to look for more places for 5G to roll out, 5G is not going to be one specific frequency. It's not going to be as if 5G needs to be at 24 gigahertz or the whole 5G thing is off. FCC is going to need to find a lot of different frequencies, and those frequencies may be near where we're trying to sense oxygen. It may be where we're trying to sense other things about the atmosphere, whether it's cloud properties, water vapor, and so on. Water vapor is so fundamentally important to our understanding of the weather and the weather itself. If we took water vapor out of the picture, I think the only thing we would be talking about on shows like this is how hot and dry it was. Because a lot of the fascinating things about weather are really a result of that water vapor that's in the atmosphere and the different forms that it can exist in. So we need to be able to sense it. We need to know where the distribution of it is in the atmosphere, because without it, really trying to get on that 3 to 5 to 7 day forecast, it becomes very, very complicated. Some of the short-term forecasts maybe still be possible. It's really where we're trying to push the frontiers of prediction. We're trying to get out in that 7 to 10 day area now. And in order to do that, we need to see storms that are well over the ocean, well far away from land, where we have other sensors like radars and weather stations.
So it's kind of answering a little bit of what the next question is going to be about. So you're saying this is more of maybe a medium to long range forecasting concern. And like you said, that's essential for as we monitor tropical systems coming across the ocean, or you're monitoring maybe a winter storm that's going to affect the Central Plains and the East Coast. I mean, so this is, like you said, the short range, it can be okay, but it's the medium to long range, which is where we as forecasters, where we really need to be able to hit on that, because it gives people time to prepare for what's coming.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I'm sure you might know about the European model. There's also the American model. But the Europeans actually did a study and looked at the impacts of all of this water vapor data, this microwave data, as we call it, from the weather satellites. And they looked at it for Superstorm Sandy. And everybody remembers how devastating Superstorm Sandy was for New Jersey and other parts of the East Coast. But if you look at what the European model did, without some of this, we've been able to determine that these observations are very, very important if you're concerned about that advance notice of where storms are exactly going to make landfall. And as we know, nothing's ever a given. Even though our weather forecasts have gotten much better recently, a lot of that due to use of weather satellites, by the way, there's still some uncertainty, and we certainly don't want to go backwards with that trend.
And so, Jordan, I know there's been a big push from the folks at the Weather Service and NOAA to kind of look at all these ways before we implement this. What you're just talking about reminds me of the emergency management community, where their priority is getting people prepared, days in advance. So has there been any feedback from that community on what this may mean for them and their preparations?
I mean, we have reached out to the emergency management community and made sure that they are informed. I'm not sure in the latest proceeding if anybody's reached out directly to their legislator or to the FCC for some of their public comment periods, but I can tell you that emergency managers want the latest information, and emergency managers are often heavily reliant on some of these communication platforms that we have in order to give a direct line of information to people that need it when disaster strikes. And I know the Florida Department of Transportation, for example, has communication systems not really at that 24 gigahertz, but at a different part of the spectrum that's also being threatened by 5G, that gives them, information about flood level, river levels in the case of flooding, to work on those evacuation routes. And so we have very dedicated sets of radio frequencies that help with communicating weather information and collecting information. And emergency managers definitely care to make sure that's protected, because you can guarantee when there's a disaster, everybody's going to try to get on their cell phone and emergency managers want to make sure the roads are open, people are safe, first responders can get to people when they need to. It's a huge thing.
And you said everyone's going to be on their cell phone. So that leads to my next question. You mentioned earlier we're going to start seeing more of these cell phones with 5G capability coming out soon. Just how soon are we looking at seeing the effects from this?
It could be within the next year or two, depending on how quickly 5G gets rolled out. Some of that's a question for the telecoms. Obviously, they have to get enough cell phones out there and sell their services. But I think it's going to be very, very soon here. There's a global race right now to 5G, and there's a set of auctions that the FCC is seeing the impacts of this. Of course, the weather community is still working to educate people, trying to explain where we can the possible effects of this to try to make sure that 5G goes into places that won't be as impactful or won't impact our critical weather observations at all.
And that was something I was wanting to ask there. What is the Weather Enterprise?
Enterprise has been very involved with this. It's not only the American Meteorological Society, but also the National Weather Association and the American Geophysical Union. We're really concerned about how 5G might impact weather forecasts. And so they've filed briefs with the FCC and worked with legislative staff to make sure that they understand. And it really is a bipartisan issue. We've got attention from it from both Democrats and Republicans. And they understand people who live in weather-sensitive areas, whether you're in Washington state or you're in Oklahoma, the impacts of that. As far as say the second part of your question again, I'm sorry, I forgot it.
So if we do start to see some of this bleed over and the water vapor element is contaminated a little bit, is there any other alternate things that can be going on that can kind of help us suffice with the information we need?
Yeah, absolutely. We first of all, we do need to make sure that the spectrum is protected, because the 24 gigahertz, some of these are very unique observations that we're not going to get anywhere else. Now, in very marginal situations, we may be able to find and launch other instruments that could augment the weather observations that we have today. So additional weather satellites, for example, something fancy called hyperspectral soundings might help mitigate the effects. They probably won't eliminate it completely. And it certainly depends on the extent at which the 5G networks are rolled out. A more widespread 5G network using frequencies similar to what we're trying to sense is going to have a much greater impact. It'll be much more difficult to mitigate than just having one or two cities somewhere that might have a much more limited or regional impact.
So I know we were talking about the future. We talked about the future rollout. But as we go in, like you said, the next year to 2 years, I mean, what is the future? What are we working on? What are you guys working on in your office to kind of see this through?
Well, UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Space Science Engineering Center, Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies, that is actually the birthplace of satellite meteorology. So there's a large history going back 50, 60 years working on weather satellite experiments. And the scientists that work at SSEC are continuing to look for new ways to really get weather information from satellite imagery. There's looking at pictures, and that's great. It's great for geeking out. There's a lot of very subtle information that we can gain from that imagery, comparing images to each other, comparing different spectral bands, as we call them, slightly different wavelengths of energy. And by doing all that, we can really assist weather forecasters in doing their job and making a very high quality forecast coming out of the numerical models, those complex algorithms, and translating into warnings that I think everybody can take with greater confidence.
Well, Jordan, we certainly appreciate you joining us tonight talking about this, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear more about it. Any other kind of closing thoughts or anything like that as we come upon? I think December is the next time that we see some of these auctions take place for the frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in this, of course, set your Google News alerts to 5G and weather. We probably haven't heard the last of this issue yet. American Meteorological Society, I'm actually the chair of a committee on radio frequency allocations. We're doing some great work, so you can go to the American Meteorological Society at ametsoc.org/radio. And you'll see our committee, and on the left-hand side of that webpage, there's some resources that links to news stories and other things that are out there. So feel free to stay informed by keeping track of the issue through those two means, and it's not going away anytime soon. Continue to pay attention to this if you care about weather forecasts and timely warnings.
Jordan, we certainly appreciate that, and we hope that all this can get worked out where it benefits the weather community, but also, I mean, I think we also want a little bit 5G on our phone to have some faster service and things like that. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. And again, would you mind sending out those webpage addresses and maybe Twitter handles that folks not only who want to follow this, but also want to follow more stuff coming out of Wisconsin-Madison there with the satellite research that you all do?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at JJGirth. My last name is Gerth. And just remember, we can have 5G and we can have accurate weather forecasts. They can coexist. We just got to work on those property lines a little bit. So we can all get along. But we got to do so carefully and make sure that everybody's playing nice in the sandbox.
And while we're talking about what people can do, this slipped my mind, but how can the public? I mean, do they have a voice in this? What can they do to help keep our 5G, but also keep good weather information as well?
Oh, I mean, we live in a democratic society. People know how to reach out to their federal government legislators. That's the best way to do that. Your House representative and senator, tell them, hey, I'm concerned about weather forecasts. Weather forecasts have a big deal for me or my business, but I also want 5G. And so, I think hearing that balanced approach is really what we seek in the weather community. We want to make sure we're using our radio frequencies effectively, but we also understand that we have to have 5G because that's how commerce happens around here. And there's no taking those crazy tornado videos away from anybody. And they got to be coming streaming faster than ever. So we understand how it all works, and we're fortunate to have our legislators on both sides of the aisle be paying attention to this, because everybody does understand what accurate weather forecasts mean for people in the path of storms or who have to evacuate. And we obviously don't want to jeopardize that.
Jordan, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. If you want to, stick around. If not, if you have to go, we certainly understand that. I do want to go ahead and toss it over to Jared Smith, who has the latest look at the tropics and some of the weather news that we've been monitoring over the past week. Jared?
Yeah, we're going to get to the tropics here in a minute. It's I blame former guest Jonathan Erdman for this. He said that there was going to be he was thinking it might be 0 for August, and then all of a sudden we got Chantal, and now we might have something else trying to fire up. So we'll see. We'll get there in a second. But a couple newsworthy things that have come about. One of them very relevant to the discussion that we just had. So an Inspector General's report was just released last week, talking about some of the malfunctions on the GOES-R satellites. So GOES-17, as we may have, as we've talked about before, has an issue where not all of the channels are available because of the instrument overheating, and as a result, we lose, water vapor. We lose some of the infrared channels, and that really has a major impact during like warm times, where the satellite is more pointed directly at the sun. And so Inspector General went back and tried to figure out what's going on. Well, what had happened was they didn't test for it properly. They had a fix, but they didn't test it in a vacuum. Space is a vacuum. So yeah, great. It works great in a normal atmosphere. Yeah, GOES 17 does not operate in a normal atmosphere. So lots of interesting things coming out of that. As it turned out, one of the contractors should have had their pay docked for not meeting certain performance benchmarks and milestones. That did not happen. They got their full payment. So suffice to say, there's a little consternation about that right now, and it's interesting. GOES 16 actually may have a similar problem. It's just not noticeable. It's still within the normal threshold. So who needs 5G when the call is coming from inside the house? Am I right? So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Hopefully, they can get the issue corrected on the next 2 satellites to go up. But it certainly makes you concerned. Like we have this great technology, but it may begin degrading faster than we think. And 5G or no 5G, this is something that'll be very interesting to watch. And the space weather guys, some of the instruments that they use to monitor ejections from the sun isn't working as well. They're actually relying on the older satellites for that. So this is something up with these GOES-R series. It's very unfortunate to read. We love GOES 16. We love the ABI. And it's kind of sad to see. Hopefully they can get some of these fixed for the next round. And now a little nightmare fuel, courtesy of tropical cyclones. So researchers a couple months ago published a study. They're talking about, insects and how they look. Do you remember some of those pictures of the ant hills that were going around after Florence? The floating ant hills. It's like, oh God, those are just absolutely terrible. I can do you one worse. How about hangry spiders? Yes, hangry spiders. Angry, hungry, hangry. More aggressive. These spiders were found to be more aggressive in the wake of tropical cyclones because there isn't as much food around, not as much prey. So it's a more competitive environment to get food, and so areas that were hit very hard with Florence. So these researchers went out and measured. They would tap on the webs and measure the response time to figure out how aggressive to get a quantitative measurement rather of aggression. And as it turns out, it looks like there is some correlation there. They believe that it could be the prey. We'll see. More research to be done, but if a tropical storm comes through and you see a spider, you might want to steer clear.
I don't think I want that job, Jared. I think I'll pass on that research job.
Yeah, that research job is just not. That's something I prefer to look at the causes of the cyclone itself. I'll leave the hangry spiders to others. That's fine.
I wonder if we could call Peter a hangry spider when he goes to Cinnabon.
Well, I'm sure we could. I think we've all kind of been there. Am I right or am I right? Anyway,
absolutely, yeah.
So before we let the hanger get out of hand, I've got a Cinnabon down the street. I might have to make a quick run now. We do have some activity in the tropics, like I mentioned at the top. We do have the tropics is starting to heat up. We're starting to get into that peak of the season. And we're starting to see some signs that maybe things are trying to stir up. Now, it's not quite what you think. It's certainly nothing in the main development region. That still remains relatively quiet. But we do have a couple of systems that are kind of fascinating. So the first one is Tropical Storm Chantal. Surprise! This happened last night at about 10 o'clock. I put out a special tropical weather outlook, and they're like, we have a tropical storm out here. Okay, that's cool. So where the heck did it come from? As it turns out, do you remember that soaking we got along the Carolina coast this past weekend? And we had the NHC kind of looking at it, see if it was going to form. Well, it did end up forming. That became Chantal. But it's 500 miles now, southeast of Nova Scotia. It's going to do a little loop-de-loop in the North Atlantic with 40-mile-an-hour winds. And then it's going to dissipate, and it's just going to fall apart. Shipping traffic are going to have to watch out for it, but no threat to land. Now, little bit closer to home, we do have an area of disturbed weather in the Bahamas. It's not really gotten an invest number yet. They're just kind of watching this area. Over the weekend, it may start drifting closer to the southeast coast, may develop into something. Hard to say if it might. It's got a 20% chance. 20 is not zero, but it's not 100 either. So not to say that there will be something out there, but a little tropical wave could enhance some rainfall once again for coastal sections getting into the weekend and into early next week. Hurricane Center is watching it. For now, nothing to worry about. Just something to keep an eye on, and a good reminder that it is tropical season, and these things do turn on a dime. So if you've been breaking into your hurricane snacks, maybe you don't want to do that. So that's the news. That's all the news that's fit to podcast. James, Scotty, you got some storm reports for us. It's been a busy weather day up in North Carolina.
Yep, that's right, Jared. I will take it from here. It has been yet another day of severe weather here in the Carolinas. Let's start right now with those storm reports on your screen. Right now, we're looking at all of the storm reports thus far that have come in and been verified by the National Weather Service. And for those of you listening on our podcast, what we're looking at here is numerous reports of trees down from Greensboro into Winston-Salem, even back towards the Hickory area. And this is really what we want to begin our conversation on tonight as we digest the ongoing severe weather that we've been seeing the last few nights here in the Carolinas. Let's look first at some Twitter pictures that came in of the result of a microburst. This was in Iredell County near Statesville, just north of the Charlotte area. And you can see the extensive tree damage that came down along Highway 70 just to the west of Statesville. And what we believe happened is a microburst came through, all associated with a severe thunderstorm. So I've taken radar scope here and I've pulled the clock back to about 4:30 or so. And watch here in the Hickory area, and then areas towards Bethlehem, Alexander County, and eventually over here towards the Iredell area and Statesville. And what you're looking at on the left-hand side of your screen is the rain reflectivity. On the right side of your screen, the wind velocity. And just look right about here. You see these wind intensities, that red area now turning pinkish, whitish. That's as winds are climbing up towards 70 miles an hour. And then right here, right near the Bethlehem area is where we begin to see what we suspect was a microburst. And you'll remember from weeks past, that's when all of the winds come shooting out like a funnel down from the storm and out. And it was at this moment that we think, as the winds were coming down and out ahead of the storm, we actually got a little waterspout or gustnado. Scotty Powell found this video, and Scotty, let's roll it here on the screen. And this was in that general vicinity. Tell us a little bit about what we saw.
Yeah, so we had 3 or 4 severe thunderstorm warnings at the time that this was issued, and this all originated in the foothills and continued through the Hickory into the Statesville area. Had a firefighting friend send me a text and said, "Hey, there's a water spout on Lake Hickory," and I kind of just laughed at him. I was like, "No, not really." And then found this video was sent to me, and so I reached out to the gentleman who shot this, Mr. Matt Quarles. And Matt said, yeah, definitely indeed. At 4:35, right before the thunderstorm moved through the area, we did see a little bit of he got a water spout. I was able to talk with the Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg. They called it a gustnado, so gustnado water spout. And so, yeah, it was very brief, but as you can see here, definitely a little gustnado out over Lake Hickory. Thankfully, no damage was reported, but it was the start of James, what you're talking about later on in Shelby, seeing those amazing pictures of all those large trees that were down from these high winds.
Let's try this again. For those of you watching live, audio would help. The left-hand side of your screen right now, we're looking at video from Monday. This was as another microburst. This one near Charlotte Douglas International Airport in Charlotte brought winds of over 65 miles an hour and some dime-size hail. So today marks the third straight day of seeing some severe weather in the Charlotte area. You can see the wind whipping in this video from Monday, and you'll have to just take our word for it that there was some dime-sized hail falling. On Tuesday, we also had a strong thunderstorm, not a severe thunderstorm, come on through and actually flood some roadways in the uptown area, resulting in a water rescue of 2 people who were in a vehicle that traveled into a flooded roadway. And yet again, a reminder, if you see water on the roadway, turn around, don't drown. You don't know how deep that water is, and luckily those people are doing okay tonight. So we're again right now at this hour for our live viewers continuing to watch some strong thunderstorms that are moving now through central parts of North Carolina. You can see it here on the Weather Service radar from Raleigh, and you can actually see one of those outflow boundaries, that dark blue line out ahead of the rain, and that's where we would see a lot of this wind kicking up. And so we'll continue to monitor this right now, guys. No warnings on this. And Scotty, I understand you have one additional storm survey report that you wanted to talk about from Saturday.
Yeah, James, I'm not sure if you got that graphic that we got popped up here. Maybe we can get that. But there was some thunderstorms that moved through central South Carolina. In fact, in Newberry County, that is where we saw another large thunderstorm damaging straight line wind downburst wind event. This was from the National Weather Service in Columbia, South Carolina, in the city of Newberry. This was again on August 17th. And we saw a downburst happen where 85 to 95 mile per hour wind occurred in that area, uprooted some trees, created some damage onto some homes and things like that. So it's been a very active week per se with severe weather. And so 85 to 95 mile per hour winds, that'll definitely do some damage in the area. So it looks like we're going to continue to see this thunderstorm threat for your Thursday and for Friday, and you can see the graphic there of the downburst winds. So we're going to continue to see the threat for thunderstorms Thursday, Friday. Again, Friday actually could be a little bit stronger as we see a cold front approach the area. It's going to kind of give a little bit more instability, a little bit more wind shear. And so I definitely think the threat for severe weather will be present on Thursday, but also a little bit more present on Friday as that cold front moves through the area. And Jared was alluding to, it kind of stalls out, and James also alluding to the flooding threat. So stalled front with rounds of heavy rain. We could also see some excessive rainfall fall in the Carolinas over the weekend. I know a lot of folks are kind of happy about the cool down that's coming, but just know that cool down is actually being accompanied by rain, thunderstorms, and clouds. So it's not going to be a sunny 83-degree day with no humidity. It's actually going to be cloudy with rain showers and temperatures around 80 through the weekend. So definitely not going to be the best weekends for you being outdoors here in the Carolinas.
Hey, Scotty, I got one more thing to add. Just came across the desk here, and I'm just working on getting my camera back up on the screen, maybe, so you guys can see me talk. But turns out that with some of this severe weather that rolled through the Charlotte area today, there was a malfunction of the Cabarrus County government alert system. An error by our automated system, reading off here on the side of the screen, posted an incorrect warning to our social pages. This is the Cabarrus County government on Facebook. We are investigating the cause of that error. We take our role to provide accurate and trustworthy information very seriously and apologize for any confusion that this may have occurred. I think this happened during about the 5:30, 6 o'clock time. This was that same line that came from the Hickory area through Iredale and eventually into Cabarrus and Rowan as it was traveling that line there. So it seems like, at least on social media, on maybe some of their other digital platforms, there was some sort of data problem that caused it to incorrectly get transmitted as a tornado warning. So we'll just confirm to everyone that short of that little gust-nado or baby water spout that we saw, which wasn't warned for being a tornado, there was no tornado warning at all in the area today.
Yeah, definitely. I saw a lot of folks work at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and some folks saying, well, there's a tornado warning here, and it just a malfunction. So thankfully, no tornado warning there. So that is some good news. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the show tonight. I do want to say next week we are taking off. So we will not be live on the air next week. So we hope you'll miss us. I'm sure we'll have some content rolling, but we're going to take a little break, a little breather before we enter September and October. And, well, we know that's the peak of hurricane season. We'll probably be some long nights of doing some live broadcast of tropical weather specials. So we're going to take next week as a breather and kind of get some rest before we enter the peak season of the tropics. So we will be returning back on the following Wednesday in September, talking about, I think we have with us documenting the 2018 hurricane season with our good friend who documented that, and my mind is going to a blank, so I can't remember his name. But we're going to be talking about that with Mark Sudduth. That's who it is, Mark Sudduth. Mark, I apologize if you're watching tonight. Mark will be on with us talking about his documentary on the Hurricane Florence and Michael last year. So we hope you have a great evening out there. Again, remember, stay weather aware over the next few days as we monitor the chance for more strong to severe thunderstorms Thursday and Friday afternoon, and then kind of a cloudy, gray, cooler, rainier weekend as that front stalls out. And we'll also be monitoring the tropics to see if anything spins up off of the coast. So we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here for another episode of the Carolina Weather Group in 2 weeks. We'll talk to you later.